Good morning. When you were gathered around tables this past week, what thoughts came before your mind? What type of fellowship did you engage in? I hope that you had an opportunity to gather with friends and family over the past week, over our Thanksgiving holiday. But know that even if that wasn't a part of your experience, what we did just moments ago when we took of the bread and of the cup, that table is an eternally good place where you always find a seat. And this passage that we're going to get into this morning, we read through it last week, and we tried to go and live it in a small way last week. 1 Corinthians 13, and you can turn there. But the only reason we can know what Paul even is talking about is because of what happened and what we reflect on and experience around the table. We observe the table. It's the central element of what we do when we gather because we recognize Christ among us and His love that was outpoured in the most remarkable and unimaginable way. You know, C.S. Lewis once made the point that people only started depicting the crucifixion when the last one who actually witnessed one had died. And I think that the magnitude of that kind of sacrifice is beyond our ability to kind of conceptualize. And we try to depict it in movies, we try to depict it in art, and we can get at something of the nonverbal nature of Jesus' love in those ways. But when you look at love, that's really where you see the face of Christ. So this morning we're going to talk about love. What love is, a little bit of what love is not. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through 1 Corinthians 13 to begin with. I'm going to read through the whole thing, verses 1 through 13. And let Paul speak first on the excellency of love. And I'm actually going to begin at the end of chapter 12. Verse 30 of chapter 12, all do not have gifts of healings, do they? All do not speak with tongues, do they? All do not interpret, do they? But earnestly desire the greater gifts. And I show you a still more excellent way. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they'll be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, and love abide these three. But the greatest of these is love. The greatest, most important gift of the with God life is that which is a response to Christ living within you. It's love. See, the Corinthian church, as we've detailed in the last 12 chapters prior, didn't just have an idolatry problem. They didn't just have a pride issue. We've talked a lot about that one. The real problem wasn't that they were lawbreakers, though certainly they were. The real issue was that they were love breakers. They had a love problem. And because they had a love problem, everything else was disorderly among them. And if we look in our lives, if we look in our world among us, we see the political circus that goes on week in and week out. We see the ecological disasters that go in and week out. We see the wars among different families and different nation states. We even look and we see the war within, and we feel that. And we know the immensity of those internal battles that we face. If you really want to get to the root of those issues, they're love problems. If there's any disorderliness in our life, in our church, in our nation, it's a love problem. It's a love problem. And so if we want to realize what the epitome of this Christian life is, it comes down to those 4 letters. L-O-V-E. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? And in truth, it really is simple. But it's not always easy. It doesn't always seem pragmatic. It doesn't always fit what we feel like doing or saying or thinking. So why is love so vital to this Christian journey? What is it about love that gets at the heart of what it means to be a Christ follower? Well, I want to look at the passage I actually read in the scripture reading, 1 John 4, in verse 7, and you can be turning there with me, or tapping, or scrolling, or swiping, or however you get to your passage. Conjure it up in your mind if you've got an excellent memory. If you're like me, you're almost to a stone tablet inscriptions. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from where? It's from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God, and this is the really interesting thing here, God is love. Okay. I have a book that says God is a verb. That every time you see a depiction or a description of God, there's an action associated with His identity. And so why is love so important to this Christian journey? Well, we read down, if we get down further, we say that it was from this love that He sent Jesus. It's this love that compels us. It's this love that He had, that He first poured on us. Even, Paul says in Romans 5, and Mark was getting at that this morning, that even while we were still sinners, Christ did what? Died for the ungodly. Even when we were still rejecting Him, He still loved us. He goes on in chapter 8 of that book to say there's nothing that can sever us from that love, not even death itself. So why is love so vital? Because love is the very identity of God. When you participate in the love life, you're also participating in the with God life. When you're participating in love, you're living in God's reality. And God is the totality of reality. So you're living in tune with the way He made things to be. Okay? So let's put it in a different way. Chuck, I know, and I don't mean to point him out, but I know he likes to scuba dive. And when you scuba dive, you obviously are not above the surface, right? You have to go into a foreign environment. And you go down into that water and you explore a completely different realm. And the only way you're allowed to explore that different realm is because you have a tank that's supplying you oxygen to give you life. Right? If that oxygen runs out or you deplete it, you have just a matter of seconds or maybe minutes at most to get back to the surface to where you can get water. And that can be very dangerous if you go down so deep with the pressure and all. This world that we're in, This is a marine environment. And we've been sent here by God to explore it and to live in it. But we can't do it as a Christian unless we breathe in His atmosphere. His atmosphere is love. And the sooner we realize that, the better we're able to impact and explore and enjoy this place. But if we cut ourselves off from it, that's it. Right? So, the excellency of love is about participating with God in reality. Okay? The way He made things to be, the way He is, the way He exists. When you participate in love, you're participating with God's existence. And so now let's go back to 1 Corinthians 13, and we're going to really get into, I want to just take a little bit of a step back and kind of give some backdrop and then get into this passage, because I think with that in mind, it gives everything in 1 Corinthians 13, and especially this first part, a new meaning. Paul here saying, if I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. These are some pretty stark statements, aren't they? We all know the wealthy billionaire who is known for their philanthropy. We all know others in their lives who seem as such generous people. They're always giving. And then it comes out later on that a scandal happens and they were embezzling funds, or they were doing something a bit nefarious through this quote-unquote charity. See, Paul says, look, you can do some really amazing things on this earth, and you can even embody these spiritual gifts. The spiritual gifts aren't a problem. They're a real problem for Corinth because the Corinthians want to esteem themselves as being super spiritual because of them. The spiritual gifts are the temporary container in which we exemplify God's glory. But the key word there is temporary. Right? They have a temporary purpose. And if they're made the ultimate, then again, we have a love problem. And usually that love problem comes down to me, right? See, our world tries to slip us into either acedia or apathy. It tries to cause us to kind of revert back to self and make the universe about ourselves. And then I heard Colin Smith, he's a preacher, he's on Moody Radio a lot. He said, if someone really loves God, you could tell, because if someone makes a lot, the humble person makes a lot about what God is doing in them. The proud person makes a lot about what they're doing for God. And sometimes we can look like we're like pious or we're holy because we set ourselves up as to what we are doing for Him. Right? And social media just blows us out of the water, right? I mean, everybody not everyone, but a lot of people put their best self forward on Facebook, right? You all probably know exceptions to that, but we put out there who we want. That's why talking is projecting, right? Whenever you speak, you're projecting something about yourself. When you're in silence, you're dealing with reality, okay? And so, we look at this and this world says, you should give and you should be charitable because it's good for you. You should do kind things for other people because it makes you feel good. If you want to be happy, you give to other people. Now, on the surface, that seems like, well, what's wrong with that? But it's a very utilitarian view of kindness and generosity. Because really, it's not about love, it's about me. It's not about the other. And Paul is saying, look, you can have these amazing, Jesus said, if you have faith, you can move a mountain. And he said, you can have that kind of faith, but if you don't have love, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. And he even goes so far as to say, if I don't have love, I am nothing. Non-existent. Reverting back to the original chaos. And and there's a progression here. Let me turn to that. He goes from tongues to prophecy to faith to benevolence to even self-sacrifice, right? I mean, the ultimate expression of love would be laying your life down for someone else, right? I mean, Jesus said that. There's no greater love than this. But even if you give yourself up as a martyr, and that's what he's talking about here, but it doesn't come from a posture of love. It doesn't profit you anything. Sure, you may get some accolades and you may be remembered throughout history, but that's the extent of your reward. Love is completely beyond self. So without love, I like that. It's like a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. It's a distraction, right? It's life-taking. It's without profit. So the excellency of love must exceed our gifting and our causes. It must exceed our gifting and our causes. The excellency, and then we're going to go through verses 4 through 7, must inhabit our thoughts and our behaviors. So let's look at verses 4 through 7. There's two things here. It says that love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Now, undoubtedly, you've probably heard this before. You've either heard it preached. Most likely, you heard it at a wedding. Or you have a picture in your home hanging up that says love is, and you've got chapter 13 on there. And all those are wonderful places to experience this and hear this. And certainly, if marriages tried to embody this, they would be blessed, and it would be a lot different situation than we have in this country concerning marriage. But Paul here in the context is writing to the church. And what's really interesting is he begins with the thing we probably wish he wouldn't have begun with. It's patient, right? And really, some translations put it this way, and I think this is probably more accurate. It's long suffering. That doesn't really sound pleasant. I thought love was about a good feeling. Long suffering, that doesn't really sound too pleasant to me. Let's flip that around. It's to suffer a long time. And he's not really, in the Greek, he's not really talking about situations. He's talking about people, which are the worst to try to suffer long with, right? That's the last thing we wish he would have said. It sounds really great an idea, but man, Paul didn't know about this situation at my work. If he'd known that, he wouldn't have said that, you know. Or he didn't know about this situation in my family. That person, they could wear the horns off a billy goat. And if Paul knew them, he wouldn't have written that. That's not true. Look at Paul's life. Look at what he experienced. And he says, real love suffers a long time. It's patient. And it returns that with kindness. Returns it with kindness. Returns it with kindness. Then he swaps to some things that love is not. It is not jealous. It does not brag. It is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It does not take into account a wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in evil or unrighteousness. You got to remember here, he's speaking to a community who thinks that they're really spiritual, but as we're going to get to in a minute, he compares them to a child. And with children, you have to tell them, you have to model it for them, right? People need someone to model the way for them. You know, there's that saying, how you teach someone, right? I do and you watch. I do and you help. You do and I help. You do and I watch, then you do it, right? That's the way we generally think about people learning. And Paul's saying here, look, you've got a serious love problem, Corinthian church. Love is patient and love is kind, but it is not these other things. It's not what you've been experiencing of jealousy and boastfulness and arrogance and this sort of unseemly, unbecoming behavior. I mean, my goodness, you got this situation with one of your leaders going on with his stepmom. I mean, come on, it's not acting unbecomingly. It doesn't take wrong into account, and it doesn't celebrate evil. And I tell you what, when I look out across church culture in our day, there's a lot of that last point happening. There's a lot of celebration of evil. Say, no, certainly not. No. Open your eyes. Open your eyes. I could point you to a million places where you see this happening every day. These are not love. Love rejoices with the truth. You know, there's a Taryn Wells song. I don't know if you listen to contemporary Christian music, but Taryn Wells is an interesting person. I really like him. And we were at a concert and we saw him, and he did, I think, more preaching than he did performing. But it was interesting because my parents were like, "He's so young. He's so young. He's really young." And so I looked it up, and he's 33. That's how old I am. I said, "Yeah, he's really young. He's really young." He's got this song out. He says, "I'm fully known," and he's talking about God, "and loved by you. You won't let go no matter what I do. It's not one or the other. It's hard truth and ridiculous grace to be known, fully known, and loved by you." And that's what it is. It's both. It doesn't celebrate evil, but it rejoices with the truth. It rejoices with the truth. And then he says here, it bears all things, it believes all things, it hopes all things, and it endures all things. I mean, when Paul says all things, I mean, he really means everything, the totality of reality. It can bear it. It can believe through it. It can hope through it, and it can endure it. You wonder in your life, how am I going to endure this? Comes back to love. How am I going to bear the weight of this thing, this news, this experience, this situation? Comes back to love. Because love believes God through it, even when the fog seems so dense. And Paul even uses that point, right? It's like we're looking in a mirror dimly. The mirrors in antiquity were not like mirrors of today. They're not like when we go into our bathroom and it's a pristine, clean image there. They were usually made of hammered bronze or something of that nature. And so you can imagine trying to look at an image in that. You can see a picture that doesn't look exact. And that's what he says we're at right now. Kind of trying to peer through that fog to see. And the only way that we can get to what's beyond the fog is if we have love guiding us. I love what Charles Spurgeon said here. He was a 19th century preacher in England. He said, "I would, my brothers and sisters, that we could all imitate the pearl oyster. A hurtful particle intrudes into its shell, and this vexes and grieves it. It cannot eject the evil, and what does it do but cover it with a precious substance, extracted out of its own life, by which it turns the intruder into a pearl. Oh, that we could do so with the provocations we receive from our fellow Christians, so that pearls of patience, gentleness, long-suffering, and forgiveness might be bred within us by that which has harmed us." You will experience a hurt. And unfortunately, in this life, it seems that sometimes we're hurt the most by the people that we're closest to. Right? What more important message is this for this family at Corinth? Right? who have hurt each other, who inflicted so many wounds because, well, I follow this person, I follow that person. Well, I'm spiritual and you're not. And you know what? I'm sorry you didn't get here early enough, but all the Lord's Supper and all the love feast is gone. Sorry about your luck. And Paul here is saying, look, love bears through that. Love turns that harm into something beautiful. Brings beauty from the ashes, as Isaiah would put it. So the excellency of love is participating with God. It must exceed our giftings and our causes. It must inhabit our thoughts and our behaviors. And the excellency of love's durability must elevate our maturity. Let's look at the end of this. Verses 8 through 13. Love never fails, but if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. There's an interesting little parallel here. I thought it was important to draw out. If you remember at the beginning of the chapter, and I want you to look there with me in your Bible. Beginning of the chapter, he begins with speaking in languages, speaking in tongues, right? Tongues of angels, tongues of people. And then when he talks about being a child, and he's not talking about being childlike, okay? There's a difference between being childlike and being childish. Childlike is what Jesus called us to embody. Right? You can't enter the kingdom if you're not childlike. But being childish will sure keep that door shut. And so Paul is talking about being childish. And he's talking to them as children. And he said, yeah, whenever I was a child in the faith, I used to speak like a child. And remember, next he moves to prophecy. And down here in verse 11, I thought like a child, right? Understanding. Prophecy was about understanding. And then reason like a child. Has to do with knowledge. What he says right up there in verse 2. So he's connecting this and he's alluding to this within his own chapter. It's really marvelous. It's really clever, but it's really important. It's a very pastoral way to do this. Do you see what I'm saying? He's handling them with kid gloves. Okay? He's trying to be gentle with them. Said, yes, I used to do all these things when I was young in my faith. And not that these are wrong, and not that gifts are unimportant. They are. But they're temporary vessels. Nothing more. They're gifts that we've been given to do God's work. But that work is the work of love. And Paul said, I put away these childish things. And now I'm striving toward the highest aim. The highest aim is love. And that only comes through maturing in Christ. The excellency of love requires that our gifts, our interests, and our causes grow pale in its light. And I liked what David Guzik said here. He said, when the sun rises, we turn off lesser lights. These spiritual gifts, they have an important place. But when the sun of love arises, these other lights need to be fading away. With the sunlight of love rising in our soul, we must allow its excellency to inhabit our thoughts and behavior and elevate our maturity through its durability. Love severs through the constraints of apathy, our self-importance, this universe of me. I mean, this whole culture, that's what it's all about. I mean, advertising is so effective. They don't spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on it because it doesn't do anything. They know if they could sell you to you, and what you like, I mean, you look at some of these again, I'm not bashing them. They're just very clever. But you look at some of these marketing plans and all the detail that they put in and try to get you to buy something, and it's all surrounded around the self-love. There's so many ways to hack the human mind. There really are. And they understand that. And Paul's saying, hey, love takes you beyond all that. Faith, hope, and love. These things abide. But faith, it will go away. Right? Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of what is not seen. Right? Hebrews 11, verse 1. So when what is unseen becomes what is seen, where does faith go? Well, it's no longer necessary. Hope is that enduring, abiding anticipation of the goodness of God that, again, we are yet to realize. We have a snippet. You know? We have a fancy term for that in theology, right? Inaugurated eschatology. That means that the end of the times has already begun in one way through the initiation of Jesus. And we can experience that now through the inward work of the Holy Spirit upon our conversion to Him and immersion into Him. But it's not the fullness. Paul said we're still peering through that fog and it's very dim. But when we see Him in the fullness and that hope is realized, hope goes away. It's very necessary now, but it's not eternal. In love. The greatest is love. And it never fails. Love never fails. I want to read, before I close, a couple things. One's from a younger lady, a poem she wrote in 2014 called This Place of Love. And I just want to read that. And she's talking about God here, as I think will be evident. Says, this is where I rest. This is where my anxious thoughts run away. I am safe here. I have peace in this place. This place is your love. This is where I relent. This is where I cease my striving. I let go here. I release my control in this place. This place is your love. This is where I am healed. This is where I take my wounded soul. I am cleansed here. I am made whole in this place. This place is your love. This is where I am held. This is where I shed my tears and weep. I am comforted here. I find a loving embrace in this place. This place is your love. Wherever I am, whatever I do, whatever is in my life, you will find me here in this place of love. And then she ends her poem with the scripture, John 15, verse 9. As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. And then the other, not as recent, came from William Evans, written in 1915. He just had an excellent description of how love looks. Love bears the infirmities of the weak. It does not please itself, but seeks the welfare of others. It surrenders things which may be innocent in themselves, but which nevertheless may become a stumbling block to others. It gladly forgives injuries and gives the place of honor to another. What then is more vital than to possess such love? It is the fulfillment of the royal law and is to be put above everything else. It is the binder that holds all the other graces of the Christian life in place. By the possession of such love, we know that we have passed from death unto life. And it is the supreme test of our abiding in God and God in us. There's an interesting thing you could do with 1 Corinthians 13. You can substitute Jesus' name for love. I want to do that right now. Let's just see what it sounds like. You want to experiment? Can we do that? All right, I'm going to start in verse 4. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind and is not jealous. Jesus does not brag and is not arrogant. Jesus does not act unbecomingly. He does not seek his own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered. Jesus does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Jesus bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Jesus never fails. Now, let's do something else. I want you to put your name there. Since I'm not going to call out anyone else, I'll do myself, okay? This is not fun. Matthew is patient. Matthew is kind and is not jealous. Matthew does not brag and is not arrogant. Matthew does not act unbecomingly. He does not seek his own. He is not provoked. He does not take into account a wrong suffered. He does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Matthew bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Matthew never fails. Whew, boy, I've got you hoodwinked. Who says that? No one says that word. Some of those things are true. Some of those things are true of me. I'm a pretty patient guy. I try to be kind and generous in everything I do. But there are some of those things that certainly aren't me, and I've got to work on. I want you to put your name in there and say, where is it that God is really convicting me? Where do I need the most work at this point? Because love is worth whatever it takes. Love is a participation with God. And it's a love for other people, not for self. Not for self. This morning, if you've never come into the overwhelming, just amazing, incredible love that God has for you, you've never come into His fold. You've never been a part of His family. You've never felt the overwhelming grace. I like that song. Crowder was one of them who performed it. He is jealous for me. He loves like a hurricane, and I am the tree bending beneath the weight of His wind and mercy. If you've never felt that kind of awe-inspiring love, Christ compels you and calls you to come to Him. But if you have, and you've allowed that flame to grow dim, and you say, when I look at that list, there's a lot of work to do. Know that His grace and His mercy empowers you to do that. And He takes you where you are, but He doesn't want you to stay there. It's truth and grace, right? And if you need that restoration, if you need that renewal, as Miss Coffin wrote in her poem, God's love is that place. That's that place. Please come as we stand, as we sing.